Morning, everyone. Welcome to our event this morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to showcase our new resource on coalition building, and we have a fantastic panel here for you this morning. I'd like to start off with just a few reminders. Please feel free to rename yourself on the Zoom platform. There's a quick example here. So just include your name, your organization, and your preferred pronoun. Once we do that, we'll get started. We can go to the next slide. Wonderful. So a couple of other reminders. We are going to have a Q&A session towards the end of the event, but please feel free to chat your questions or any comments or suggestions you have using the chat function. And then just a gentle reminder to mute yourself when someone is speaking. If you'd like to speak during the Q&A session and you'd like to ask your question in person, just feel free to virtually raise your hand. If your internet connection allows, feel free to also open your video and web camera. And then here's some instructions in case you get disconnected from our Zoom session. And lastly, the session is recorded. We're actually live streaming it right now, so you will be able to watch this again later. And then without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again so much for joining us this morning for the virtual launch of our SCALE Good Governance Guidebook, which stands for Support for Coalition Advocacy, Learning, and Engagement in Good Governance. We will start our event with introductory and opening remarks from our country director, Ryan Evangelista. I am pleased to introduce Ryan. Ryan, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Srujana, and good morning and good day to everyone. Welcome to the virtual launch of CIPE WeSolve SCALE Governance Guidebook. My name is Ryan Evangelista. I'm the country director of CIPE's regional office in the Philippines. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event. Over the years, coalition building in democratic societies has evolved to support proactive policy advocacy. We're building alliances and engaging in broader spectrum of civil society actors and institutions has been a game changer. The EDSA People Power movement in 1986 led to a democratic transition enabled by strong civil societies and active participation. Culturally, civil society movement in the Philippines correlates with community building and empathy, espoused by the Filipino values of pakikipagkapwang-tao or holistic interaction with others and pagtutulungan or mutual support. As such, coalition building in the Philippines is an organic concept entrenched in our democratic values as Filipino people. Hence, we acknowledge opportunities and challenges in democracy. As we acknowledge opportunities and challenges in democracy, new approaches to coalition building are needed to respond to the emerging global democratic landscape. By empowering like-minded advocates as proponents of strong and sustainable coalitions, we can support business and civil society organizations in their efforts to put good governance and the rule of law back at the center of discussions, and to help bolster private sector and civil society partners in promoting good governance reforms, public accountability, and the rule of law. CIPE Philippines and WeSolve Foundation collaborated to develop the SCALE Good Governance or Support for Coalition Advocacy Learning and Engagement in Good Governance Guidebook. The aim of the SCALE Good Governance Guidebook is to build the capacity and help incubate advocacy coalitions that will contribute to building innovative and impactful governance solutions and policy reforms. This guidebook encompasses various principles, practical guides, case studies, and lessons learned as shared by CIPE's partners to achieve high impact good governance solutions and best practices through sustainable coalition building. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the talented and amazing CIPE WeSolve project team who put their passion and heart into this great initiative. I'll start by acknowledging the co-leads, the co-project leads of our project, Sujana Penamucha Werther, our project officer, program officer at SITE Philippines, and Ken Abante, the managing director at WeSolve Foundation. Without your leadership, Sujana and Ken, we would not have been able to put together this amazing product. And I'm just so proud and happy that we're able to collaborate in this endeavor. I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing and dynamic team, the youthful and dynamic team of WeSolve, Jesha, Jego, Haya, and the rest of the team who has just been so amazing and wonderful to work with, as well as our very own Janessa Santelices, who has also brought a lot of amazing talent into the project. I'd like to thank also our institutional partners who took part in sharing their experiences in the guidebook, and to our esteemed panelists who will share with us their experiences and lessons learned in coalition building and its contribution to enabling healthy democracies. With less than 2 weeks from now, before our national elections, we are at the critical crossroads of electing a set of leaders to navigate our country's road to economic recovery and renewal, democratic renewal. Democracy does not rest when an election cycle is over. It fires up after the fact. And for democracy to be renewed, recharged, and transformed, it has to sit on a strong foundation called values, where demand for strong, accountable democratic institutions, safeguarding democratic principles, and propelling democratic engagement is the way forward. With this guidebook, we hope to enable institutional capacity building and systems to build strong, credible, and sustainable advocacy coalitions that have clear and comprehensive advocacy agenda and ensure that good democratic governance remains a core policy priority. That said, the push for institutional reforms in our country ultimately starts with the citizenry, and that involves critical participation and engagement to make democracy work by us, by you, and me. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to a healthy and vibrant discussion this morning. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Haya Bendanya, who will walk us through with the key elements of the SCALE Governance Guidebook. Haya, take it away.
Thank you for that wonderful remarks, Ryan. I love being youthful. Okay, let's start. Um, this guidebook was developed by WeSolve Foundation and the Center for International Private Enterprise Philippines as part of the SCALE Good Governance project. The guidebook has the following chapters. So it's 12 lessons divided into 4 chapters. Starting a coalition, organizing a coalition, mobilizing a coalition for policy and systems change, and sustaining coalitions. This guidebook is designed for ordinary citizens who want to claim or reclaim their space back in democracy and want to start their journey in being more active and engaged citizens. It is also for emerging activists and advocates who want to improve their skills to fight for systems change. At the same time, it is also for more experienced organizers who would like to enrich their practice through cases and frameworks from other organizers and coalitions. But more importantly, this is also, I think, for an international audience so that they can see what Filipino coalitions are experiencing and what best practices we have here in the Philippines that they can learn from. We work very hard in writing this guidebook. As you can see together, these chapters contain 12 lessons in coalition building, 15 learning guides and checklists for coalition building skills, 11 notes on Filipino traits, attitudes, and values that best animate this coalition building skills and lessons, 28 cases, so many cases of Filipino coalitions that best illustrate these lessons, 16 annotated resource and guides for coalition building, and lastly, 100, yes, 122 references and literature on coalition building. Through these chapters also, we will share an in-depth case study of Move Us One Coalition, a coalition of 142 organizations and 77 individuals who are fighting for a safer, humane, and more inclusive public transport system in the Philippines. So Ken and I, two of the authors, actually are leading the coalition, part of the leadership and the secretariat. Of course, there are also a lot of good practices and cases that feature the great work of the partners of CIPE and WeSolve Foundation's partners in its mobilized practice. All authors are members of WeSolve. So how was this written? To write this, we went through these critical processes. We interviewed representatives from the institution partners of CIPE. We had a validation workshop from the representatives and organizations who are part of the guidebook. So a lot of them are actually here today. Good morning po. And we reflected all the lessons and refinements based on those workshops in the next revisions of the guidebook. We also want to say that this guidebook is based on the collective wisdom of everyone, including CIPE, its coalition and partner organizations, and WeSolve's network. So it's decades worth of experience organizing in civil society, in the government, in the academe, in the business, and even faith-based organizations. But we also want to note that these lessons are not exhaustive and are not universally applicable. So we want you guys to critically reflect on the lessons and apply it on your respective contexts, but also at the same time consider this guidebook a living, breathing document that will continue to change and evolve as we move forward. So we'll show you each of the 12 lessons would look like. But let's discuss my personal favorite so you'll get a sense of how each individual lesson looks like in the manuscript. So, for example, avoid unnecessary escalations during conflict. This is my favorite lesson, and this is very much used in the Move as One coalition. So, we first discuss what is escalation, why do you need to escalate in the first place, and after escalation, what do you do or how do you de-escalate, especially when issues have already been resolved. So for each of these texts, we included citations that you can use for further reading if you want to understand more on escalation and de-escalation. After which, we have a checklist on building an escalation strategy. So first, identify the coalition's target and points of reservation, map circles of influence, exhaust all diplomatic means, build an escalation channel and strategy, and develop or non, depending on the development and non-developments when you move forward, and then escalate. So if you look at the way the checklists are structured, like this one, it's a very step-by-step process. So if you or any of the coalition guidebook readers feel that it's time to escalate but are unsure of the specific steps or the sequence of the action, the guidebook is here to guide everyone from step one until the very last step when you eventually de-escalate. There are also suggested sequences for you to do it that may be applied in different contexts, especially for political lobbying. And then you even have the escalation strategies. And then, as part of the checklist and lesson 6, we have hiya, tampo, and pakikisama, which, by the way, are very unique Filipino traits. Other organizations and other cultures do not really have the concept of tampo. It's very unique to the Filipino culture, or the concept of pakikisama. And in the way that coalition organizing is done in the Philippines is heavily reliant on these 3 values, especially when you're working with senior organizers or senior public government officials. So a lot of the lessons, many of the lessons in the guidebook integrate these kinds of cultural checklists for us to showcase what particular cultural context we're actually operating on in the Philippines when it comes to advocacy and coalition building. And then hiya and tampo. Lastly, we also feature in the same case the case of the National Confederation of Transport Workers Union. So it's a member of the coalition that used escalation to give community feedback to critical government partners regarding a program that they worked for and fought for. And then the next case, on the other hand, is regarding the cycling groups and how they escalated after they already won and fought for the Metro Manila Bike Lane Network and continued to strengthen the relationship with the government officials after the escalation. So if you can see, it's a very step-by-step process. There is a checklist afterwards. And then there are cultural notes, and then there are cases that best illustrate whatever the lessons are in that particular section. So this is generally how the structure of the coalition lessons look like. And we have 12 of these that I will go through briefly because we don't have much time. So for lesson one, for example, it's chapter one, starting a coalition. We have the first lesson under this chapter, listening to the community to understand the problem. Our checklist is community listening through kwentuhan or storytelling. So in the Filipino, we call it pagmamarites. But here, formally, we call it kwentuhan and storytelling. And then our kultura is pakikipagkapwa, and our cases is Tarabangan kontra COVID. It's a local COVID response group, and move as one in crafting its organizing principles. The next one is building consensus with problem owners. Our checklist here is consensus building and alignment. Culture is tiwala or trust. Cases is how the Philippine LGBT Chamber of Commerce built consensus among its members. How Move as One strengthens group trust by empowering problem owners and representing themselves and their stakes in meetings. And how the Young Women Leaders for Peace Philippines facilitate pre-meetings for inclusivity and to better navigate dynamic relationship among its members. You have lesson 3 also, which is the first lesson in chapter 2, organizing a coalition. So it's broadening the coalition to strengthen your voice. We have a checklist here on power analysis and political mapping. Culture here is also very Filipino, bayanihan or working together. And then cases, how WeSolve built an ecosystem map to scope of market-based solutions for hunger and nutrition problem in the Philippines. You have case 3.2, which is about the People's Budget Coalition and how they're strengthening their membership to include more sectors for an equitable COVID-19 response and recovery budget. We also have how Move as One Coalition build its Ilog Pasiglahin movement to oppose the proposed Pasig River Expressway. Fourth lesson is structuring the coalition. Checklist here is how to do it, how to structure a coalition. The culture here is paggalang sa nakatatanda or respect to the elderly, which is also a very Filipino value. Two cases here. So how Right to Know Right Now Coalition built its consensus on its position on the Freedom of Information bills at the House of Representatives, and how Move as One made its decision-making processes more flexible by building a secretariat and a sectoral convening structure. Lesson 5 is engaging the right political process to build power and win change. Two checklists here on policy analysis and how it translates to Filipino government context. And locating the right decision makers in government when you want to lobby. Culture here is pananagutan. And you have 3 cases here. So Metro Naga Active Transport, Philippine business groups join foreign chambers, engaging the policy process, and how Move as One designed the budget process or engage the budget process to get its highest ever transport budget. Next one is my favorite, so I'll skip this. Lesson 7 is using data and research to sharpen cases for change. So you have how to use data for empowerment as your checklist. Culture is katotohanan or truth. And your cases here is LGBT Chamber of Commerce again, and how they created the Philippine Corporate SOGI Index, and how Strat-based ADRI engages researchers to engage in debates on issues of public concern, and how Women Biz PH engages government agency through their policy research. Lesson 8 is how to get yes by proposing not just what to change, but how to change it. So checklist here is completed staff work in setting appointments and the checklist. And how would you actually know if your staff work is already a completed one? Culture 8 here is diskarte, masinop at maaasahan. So these are all Filipino values as well. Two cases here, so Syntax Coalition and their completed staff work and lobbying for tobacco control. And the second case is how Move as One Coalition practices completed staff work in doing and pushing for special provisions in the budget. Last three, so cultivating safe spaces and communities of care. And then you have checklist. And culture is malasakit or care or empathy or compassion. I don't know the rough translation for it. Three cases. So Angat Bayi and creating their culture of sisterhood among feminist leaders in the Philippines. How Citizen Budget Tracker uses research to protect the civic spaces. And how Move as One cultivates these safe spaces and communities of care for their volunteers. Lesson 10 is raise and share resources to sustain coalition work. You have two checklists as well on mobilizing resources and prioritizing limited resources using the funding commons and impact effort matrix. Culture 10 is ambag and rabos, which are both very Filipino values as well. Two cases, CIPE raising resources and how Move as One uses the commons model to bring collective resources. Last two, so you have sharpen your focus and guard against mission drift as lesson 11. Checklist is the focus matrix. How would you know or when would you know when you should lead a movement, support a movement, or refer the movement to someone else more appropriate to manage it? Culture is pagiging tapat sa tungkulin at pagpapaubaya. So, yes. Case here is how Move as One uses this to keep on its mission. And lastly, keep pounding the rock that we can change the system together. Culture here is pananampalataya. And the case here is how we debrief and celebrate small wins and defeats and strengthen together as a community. So this is a very rich resource. And we included additional research and references for you guys to look if you want to further your reading. So these are the following ones. And my time is almost up. I think I have a minute remaining. So I'll show you guys briefly what it looks like on the manuscript. And excited to have this launch with CIPE in the next few weeks. Hold on. Stop sharing. Wrong. Sorry, hold on. Edit manuscript. Can you guys see it? So here you go. It's a very long and hopefully helpful coalition guidebook. So it's 93 pages, more or less, that we're excited to share with you in the near future. So that's it for now. Thank you very much. And I'm turning it over again to Srijana.
Thank you so much, Haya, for that wonderful presentation. We can't wait to officially show that to all of our partners here in the Philippines and abroad. I'd like to now turn it over to Ken and Jesha and Diego to get started with our panel discussion and to introduce our amazing panelists.
All right, thank you, Srijana, and good morning again to everyone. I'm Jasha Villasis, and I'm also with Haya from the WeSolve Foundation. So we hope the overview made you more excited to read and use the Coalition Guidebook. And to proceed for our panel discussion, we have invited development advocates to join us in further understanding the crucial role of coalitions in nation building.
So hi
Diego.
everyone, good morning again. I'm Diego, and Jesh and I will be moderating the discussion for today. We'd like to remind everyone to freely send your questions or comments. As I've already seen, there are some who have sent their questions. We would be discussing that later on, and we will be asking them to our panelists for today. Maybe let's begin by introducing our panelists. Jesha.
For our first panelist, we have Ms. Toik Serna from Coalitions for Change, who has devoted years in advancing good governance through the empowerment of civil society and promoting development entrepreneurship.
Next, we have Ms. Roxanne Liu, Programs and Projects Director from the Makati Business Club, working on policy and economic research, as well as designing and implementing programs focused on national development.
Our next panelist is the chairperson of the Philippine LGBT Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Ron Astillas, who proactively advocates for greater inclusion, diversity, and equality, particularly in the workplace.
And we have Ms. Kim Betcher, all the way from the USA, joining us as one of our panelists for today. He is the Director of CIPE's Policy and Program Learning Initiatives, capturing lessons learned in democratic and economic institution building around the world.
And finally, our colleague, Ken Abante, who is an active collective impact organizer with the Citizens Budget Tracker, Move as One Coalition in Tarabangan contra COVID-19, will also be joining as one of our panelists.
So good morning again, and maybe we can begin with our first question. We'd like to seek the perspective of our panelists regarding the value of coalitions in democratic societies. Why are coalitions and coalition building important for democracy? And maybe as a follow-up, we can already discuss also a question from the chat box from Mr. Warren de Guzman. How do you encourage citizens to engage in the democratic process when the country is currently dealing with extreme partisanship, red tagging, and censorship? So maybe we can start the discussion from there.
Can we probably have first Mr. Ron? Ayan, because he already is unmuted already. Ron?
Thank you, Jessa. Thank you, Jago. Good morning to all. And I'm very excited to represent the Philippine LGBT Chamber of Commerce for this session with CIPE and WeSolve. And quickly, I was looking at the guidebook, and very much, surprised that at least, we have all these lessons connected to Filipino values. But what I'd like to highlight, at least in terms of the importance of coalition building, is that number one, it's totally important. It's something that we cannot do as an individual organization. We know that I'd like to tell everyone that as the advocacy, for example, on gender inclusion, specifically on gender diversity, which focuses on LGBT plus inclusion, is something that's totally not easy in the country at the moment. And what I think is that the realities on the ground have to be recognized. The discussion on gender inclusion has been there for the longest time. I mean, if you look at in terms of the policies of the government, we have submitted the bill on SOGI, the anti-discrimination bill, or the SOGI bill, and it has been in Congress for the past 2 decades. Can you imagine that? I mean, we as a people have not recognized the importance of anti-discrimination policies towards the LGBT plus community, and even all those marginalized sectors or group. And then I think we have to ensure that we are connected to the realities on the ground. But having said this, we are also aware that there is a need to continue this kind of conversation, and we can only have this conversation if we talk to a bigger audience, a wider audience, through different partnership, through different I guess members, companies, etc. And I think that's the value of coalition building. And as I said, for us, the realities on the ground have never been easy. And you can ask yourself, you can ask where you're working at the moment, and whether your companies are actually inclusive, whether they are walking the talk. I mean, I'd like to jump straight to a few weeks' time, we'll be celebrating Pride Month again, June Pride Month celebration. And at least in the chamber, we always say that we do not celebrate Pride in June. We celebrate Pride, #Pride, every day from January 1 to December 31. And I think it's good to talk to everyone today, and at least think of the environment, the ecosystem where you're located, and whether that ecosystem embraces diversity, and whether the dialogue or the narrative that's going on around us are actually embracing more partners, more players, more organizations. So just to quickly answer, I think coalition building is always important, especially for the underrepresented, marginalized sectors of society.
Thank you for that, Sir Ron. Any thought? Yeah, si Ms. Toy already volunteered. From Toy?
Yeah, I think yeah, coalition building is very important for democracy because essentially coalition building is really about consensus building. It is a way for us development, for example, uh, you know, people who push for reform, no, policy reforms, to check the environment or to check the different perspectives, different points of view, no, about certain issues, right? We check how the different schools, advocates, tutors, transport workers, planners, see government. And we know that there are many dimensions to a problem, and there will always be also many dimensions to a solution. That's why coalition building is important so that we can really validate, even check our own biases. We policy reformers, many of us here, we have a theory of change. It's always important to check those biases with the rest of with the other stakeholders, especially those who are they're affected by the issue. And that's how coalition building gets us to a solution that will be socially acceptable to the stakeholders. We learned that in our experience in education back in 2012, and this time when we had the thinking, we were so sure. I'm sorry that my phone is like we were so sure about our solution, and then we found out that actually based from our conversations, found that we were actually wrong. There was another was an obstacle to me. So that's a very important learning also in coalition building. Sometimes you don't get it right, and maybe the answers are to be found when you start conversations up there.
All right. Thank you for that, Ma'am Toix. Now, can we have Ma'am Roxanne from MBC?
Thanks. Great points made so far. And I'm just going to build on that. So democracy really means, power of the people. And while organizations do represent different sectors, different parties of the public, there's still a merit to forming coalitions because, as was said by Ron earlier, you can't do it alone. There's power in unifying voices. There's also different perspectives that should be noted. And while one organization really views a certain issue or a certain problem in one way, there's also advantages in working with other organizations in a coalition because they have other perspectives to put in the table. And having that engagement, that rich exchange, really helps democracy and the democratic process really run smoothly. Because if you imagine, if you're a government and you talk to many organizations, have different perspectives, it can be very grueling and difficult, right? But there's also it's also difficult for them to ignore if it's a combined power, combined voices. So there's really a benefit to it. And I'm just gonna try to answer the question of Warren. How do you encourage citizens to engage in democratic processes? I think aside from voting wisely, I would encourage them to participate, try to participate, maybe in the very, very simple manner. Citizens can follow organizations, say in social media, so in social platforms, media platforms, so they know. Organizations post a lot of advocacy work, also fight disinformation, misinformation. And by having those organizations, you see them on your feeds, you're educating yourself. And so you can also make good decision making. And my third point on that is there are different organizations in your locality that citizens can participate in. For example, for us in advocating for freedom of information, like the SOGI bill, for us, FOI has been decades, a fight in the Congress for decades also. But what we're doing right now, it's a new way also as we're reaching out to local chambers, youth groups in different regions. So there's also a growing momentum in different, it's not just us or our coalition carrying that responsibility, but we also make sure that there are different organizations in different localities and regions knowledgeable about it, and they're able to speak about it. And just being able to participate in your local organizations and local coalitions really help a lot in democratic processes. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Roxanne. Kim or Ken, please feel free.
First, I'd like to compliment the team that put the guidebook together. It fills a real gap in the literature and it does it superbly. I'm going to point to the need that democracies have to create public goods to be successful. These are things like law and order, economic institutions, or public health that everybody benefits from, but nobody would step up to create on their own. We can't assume that governments will create public goods. There needs to be a mechanism to advance demand and create accountability. If I point to the experience of a country like Botswana, which had considerable development and democracy contrasted to its neighboring country, Zimbabwe, well, Botswana had a history of the large spectrum of the business community led by the Confederation having constructive dialogue with the government at different levels, and together, worked on creating public goods like Bureau of Standards, industrial courts, liberalizing foreign exchange and prices, and creating the basis for development, but doing it through democratic dialogue. But democracy isn't only about the institutions; it's about being by the people, and I think coalitions can be really useful to create pluralistic solutions, by which I mean coalitions can be good in bringing different groups together to work on common problems and helping them learn how to work together as they do that. CIPE supports a project I'm fond of in Guatemala in the highlands in Quetzaltenango, which is for youth opportunity in the creative economy. And it's a consortium of community and industry and entrepreneurial actors and municipality come together. And they've discovered ways to create spaces for co-creation, local economic development, but also cultural spaces, film festival. And so they're sort of redefining their community where it had a history of civil conflict. And then just a high level view on this, on democratization. How does it happen? Well, some places it's driven by elite processes, these pacts. Other places it's started by mass protest. If I look at Chile as a place where there was a pact among the elites, we know one of the fundamental lessons there was the unity of the opposition. A lot of groundwork laid there, and without it, fragmented oppositions cannot achieve a democratic order. But you take a place like South Korea, where there was more, protest in the streets driving for democratization, and it worked, but without sort of constructive coalition building, it can fall apart so easily. Like there's so many examples from the Arab Spring. So coalitions are really essential to keeping the pressure on for democracy.
Thank you. And following up on those excellent points, and just to maybe answer Warren's point, to me, coalition building not only helps build democracy, but it's also, a vaccine for despair. And many people have this, growing resentment against the country that we're born in, because we experience so many things like the traffic is so bad, I'm so tired at work. My family members were harmed during the pandemic. Tests are so expensive. But with coalition building, it's going to be very hard to bridge that individual desire, that anger. The system is broken. How can I change it? Without coalition building, it's very difficult for an individual to engage the processes that shape their lives. And it's important to understand that sometimes this is the only choice, especially for historically franchised communities. When we formed the People's Budget Coalition, for example, which is a coalition of around 10 CSO groups in education, labor, health, etc. Some of the groups that we're in had been, the government had attempted to censor them. But the more reason for us to stand together and stand with them and be in solidarity with them. In the Citizens Budget Tracker, when ABS-CBN was shut down, ABS-CBN reporters during that same day still did their jobs and asked us for an interview about the state of public budgeting in the Philippines. Will we be afraid to engage that journalist because government shut down? Absolutely not. The more reason for coalition building, for building those types of coalitions, the more reason we should stand with journalists. We granted the interview the next day. When government harassed Rappler, is that a reason not to engage them in the larger Facts PH coalition? Absolutely not. And it's important to continue to build those coalitions because coalitions are vaccines for despair.
Thank you for that, Ken, and thank you for the responses of our panelists, no, for the first question about the value of coalitions. I think for me personally, what I got from all of those, basically, coalitions are very important as a platform, a venue where all of us can voice out our issues, and by being together, we are also able to brainstorm and have a collective discussion on what kinds of solutions we can do or we can provide for this solution. So walang may isang walang may isang may alam ng kasagutan, or no, there is no one absolute answer to various problems that we are facing. So for the next portion, for the next theme of our discussion, coalitions are of course not immune from challenges, and we have a question here also pertaining to the challenges, the common challenges facing or being faced by coalitions or by the civil society organizations. So we'd like to ask our panelists, whoever would like to provide insights on the challenges that you have personally experienced when you were just starting building your coalitions, or until now, until the present. What are the types of challenges that you are facing, and what are the lessons that you have gained from facing these challenges? Anyone would like to start or to begin from our panelists?
Yeah.
May
Maybe
I,
I can
Chesha?
start.
Okay. Toix, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ron.
Go ahead, Toix, go ahead.
All right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. For the kind of, maybe I have to like very briefly share the kind of coalitions that Coalitions for Change is supporting. Coalitions for Change is a program of the Asian and government, and basically it's a protocol development entrepreneurship to solve development problems, right? To pursue policy reforms. And essentially, the B approach is about able to think and act like an entrepreneur, adopt entrepreneurial principles in trying to solve development problems. So the kind of coalition building coalitions that the or the Our colleagues are driven, very mission driven. And maybe I just have to emphasize these are not usual coalitions of the NGO, it's sort of a very permanent partnership. Coalitions. We have with new formations who are able to navigate more flexibly the changing political landscape, as things go, as things move forward. So, I think the challenge there, when we try to do that, oh sorry, I think maybe my signal is bad. Could you hear me well? Yeah, I think the challenge there that we face, because the kind of coalitions we try to work with are really ones that are very purpose driven, very mission driven, and sometimes these are coalitions that are temporary, temporary alliances depending on the objective at the moment of that group, right? So the challenge is really in a fast moving game of where policies are issued here, left and right, and there are processes that just move on and will not wait for you. The challenge is really in the trust building. How do you quickly build trust with different groups to try to move forward with a reform? So I think that's one of the things that we find that's most difficult or most challenging, but it's also very interesting or very exciting, because you will find that even in the unusual partnerships that you would create because you push forward a certain policy reform, you will find that you are moving out of your echo chamber and you are reaching out to different groups that actually, you wouldn't have thought that could be your partner. There are people we find in the Move as One coalition, for example. We find government employees or officials who would very willingly share information to us because we share the same agenda. And so those are the kind of coalitions or alliances that could make a big difference in trying to move forward policies that will change behaviors and change social outcomes. And just to go back to Warren's question, I think what's critical sometimes when we start, and there's just that chilling effect of red tagging, etc., is for starting coalitions to provide that safe space for people to have different perspectives on the issue. We will find that sometimes we have very different views about a certain issue, but if there is a safe space to share your opinion, and that it's okay to have a different view about a certain issue, then it will be, it's going to be a coalition that will be more, how do you say that, more, have more meaningful dialogues. So, yeah, so that's about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stoix. Sir Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Stoix. I just like to add, I think what is important, it's I know it's challenging to build trust, but it's also challenging to understand why an organization exists, why a leader exists. And that internal realization needs to happen, you have to go through the process of why you believe in the idea of developing, for example, an LGBT Chamber of Commerce. You have to believe in the idea that you are filling a gap, that we are here because our existence will be addressing a certain problem of society, and that's never easy. Some people might say, just build organizations left and right, but the point is, do you really understand why you're here? Do you know that the realities, as I said, on the ground, and what you're trying to address or to solve? And I think being the pioneer LGBT Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines and in Asia, in ASEAN, we're the first, and we're proud to say that. We're very, I guess, excited that throughout the process of our development, I mean, we're not that old, we're not that matured organization yet, we have gone through different stages of understanding our values, of realizing what are our non-negotiables, what are the main pillars of the organization. And by believing that we're here to address economic inclusion, not just in the workplace, but also in greater macroeconomic Philippine development, that's one. We also believe that we have to put LGBT plus business leadership, adding more positive stories, changing the narrative about LGBT plus people through business leadership. That's another. And also having all these pioneering work researches. I think these are the areas that we have to look at internally before we build coalition. And if we are solid and firm internally, our pillars are all set, then I think that's one challenge off our list. And then we can continue extending external partnership, getting more members, etc. And I'm happy to say that we started with like 4 or 5 companies back in 2016. Now we're 35 companies as member of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And that's just in terms of membership. But in terms of global partnership, we are a member of the 23 global network of LGBT chambers of commerce all over the world, from Latin America, Australia, Europe, UK, US. And again, we can never do this if we do not know why we're doing things for the community. And I also like to highlight to Warren, my batchmate here, Warren, it's the environment is not as as conducive for everyone, but we have to highlight that pockets of success will make people think that coalitions matter. You don't need a grand result. You don't need to have an effect that's applicable from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. But pockets of success will make people feel that they really matter, their involvement matters, that they can make change even in their own locality. And that's what we've learned. We've learned at the national government level, legislation such as anti-discrimination bill has been pending for the longest time. But we've seen certain localities doing and moving forward, progressing. And when we have these inspirational stories, examples, we tend to attract people towards action. We tend to allow them and give that space to them to participate in democratic governance, in participatory governance rather, and in democracy in general. So I think that's one message I'd like to clearly highlight today, that you don't need big things to happen. Small things will always be a good way to engage people. And I always say this to everyone that I get to talk to. I know we have to think big, we have to act local, think big, but the opportunities have to be felt by the small players on the ground.
All right, Ma'am Roxanne, Kim, or Ken, would you like to answer as well the question about the challenges that your coalitions are facing?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Well, for MBC, we serve 2 roles in different coalitions. So as coordinator or the lead organizer, and also as a participant or a member, and both face different challenges. I'll focus on the coordinator. The responsibility really is to sustain the coalition, and that's also a challenge, to build the momentum and make sure that you really achieve your goals before you wrap it up. Or as coalitions, sometimes it's not forever, right? But the difficulty is always when you just lose interest from your members even before you reach your goals. So keeping everyone's focus on that mission, again, it should be a shared mission, and keeping everyone engaged, that's always a challenge. It sounds easy, but it's not. Again, realizing that different organizations also have their different priorities, and sometimes you get together monthly or quarterly, it's easy to lose that momentum. You also have to balance the discussions in your group in making sure that everyone is heard, and that they're engaged. And one of the lessons that we learned there is sometimes in coalitions, it helps if you have subgroups or subcommittees that each have their own sub goals. Again, Ron mentioned earlier, just having short wins. You don't have to shoot for the big goal. And that's how you build the momentum. You set your KPIs, short-term goals, and you find that organically that coalition will thrive and just really create this successes or this wins, and it will just gain momentum. And on Warren's question, definitely it's not easier, but being part of a coalition, I think, reduces that risk of other red tagging or other issues, because you are part of a broader voice. It's not just you speaking up. At the same time, when you're part of a coalition, it's always wise to play on each other's strengths. Not all organizations, some organizations actually have they have different relationships and different maybe with the government or maybe with a different sector, and you play on that on those strengths. You might take, for example, an organization or the member of the coalition might not be maybe in a good graces of government or maybe an LGU, but one of your members is. So that still is a way to power through or push your advocacies together. So essentially, that's also another benefit of being in a coalition, right? It's not just you speaking, and therefore it also reduces your risk when it comes to being red tag or others. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kim. Ken?
Yeah, maybe I can start, Jacob. My first answer was supposed building. I think Toix already made a great point about that. But the second point is on sustaining the coalition. I just wanted to add to what Roxanne mentioned. Building coalitions is hard work. And while social movements and community movements are mostly volunteer driven, the movements may slow down and volunteers may burn out if the work is not supported with the right resources. Now, one of our partners, Angat Bayi, actually said, civic action cannot be all heart. Hindi puso lang. And it was a very important insight coming from our interviews with the CIPE partners. And so we tried to discuss this actually in the Coalition Building Guidebook in a few lessons. So one lesson is actually this idea that we should have a commons model or a shared funding model. So this idea that resources are not just monetary, especially if one works with historically disenfranchised sectors. It's important to view their time and their talent as resources in themselves. That we must therefore have a view that we treat them equally, right? Whether or not one gives one type of resources or another, part of the commons. It's important to view those with the same value, and it's important to also continue sustaining the coalition work through a core group that's supported, and actually here we need to mobilize funding, we need to try to mobilize donations, we try to understand how to organize the work so that we have reasonable expectations of volunteers, but at the same time, we allow them continued opportunities to engage. Say, for example, we write letters to our district representatives, or they're part of certain training programs. Like, for example, in Move As One, the Young Mobility Leaders Program, or we always share what those small wins are. So, for example, this was the budget that we were able to create, or fight for as a coalition. The highest ever transport budget the road-based public transport sector has received year on year, and it's because of the collective work. And when people have that sense of ownership, because everyone worked hard for it and everyone pitched in resources, time, skills, and expertise, and money, also many different types of resources, people feel invested in it. People own it, and therefore people want to continue to take part in it. At the same time, and we discussed this in another lesson, it's important to continue to build and maintain that safe space among our members. Both the safe space to rest, because we cannot have volunteers burn out, especially in emergency crises like COVID-19 or the public transport crisis when public transport was suspended. There's also a very important culture of care that you continue to welcome volunteers even after they've rested for a bit, and you actually thank them for resting. Or the safe space in terms of opinions, differing opinions, as Stoics mentioned, or a safe space in terms of whatever your political leaning is, you're welcome here. Whatever your partisan belief is, you're welcome in this coalition. I think it's important to continue to hold that safe space for discussion. And even if we disagree on certain issues and topics, we know that we have common ground. We know that we have a common vision. Safe, humane, inclusive public transport, or an equitable budget for COVID-19 recovery. And just to end this point, just related to coalitions as vaccines for despair. We in the People's Budget Coalition we estimate that around 1.2 trillion pesos, that's with a T, trillion pesos, we need that amount to be able to mount a successful and equitable COVID-19 recovery. But national government was only able to grant around 66 billion pesos, or around 100 billion pesos, including unprogrammed funds, in the 2020. One can view that both ways, right? They are both facts. That it was a win for historically disenfranchised sectors to push that. At the same time, there's a lot that can be done. And I think both are causes of hope that we must continue to fight and fight for and claim for our safe spaces in democracy. Thank you.
For Kim, we'd like to specifically ask about the challenges that you have observed from the studies that you have made across the world.
The challenge I see most often is that people rush into building coalitions without going through the steps that are outlined in chapter 1 of the guidebook. You can't force it. And sometimes even the specific need to establish a coalition just isn't there. So I'd cite one example from CIPE history years back in Liberia, where there was wishful thinking. We wanted to bring together business organizations representing business people in the 2 major ethnic groups, constituencies in the country, and create a grand coalition, which would have been a wonderful thing. The problem was that neither side was interested in doing that. And so there's a lot of wishful thinking. People are asking for examples of TORs and want to create complex formal structures when they haven't informally got that shared understanding of purpose and what it means to the individual participants and leaders. The second example I'd give, second challenge, is fear of advocacy. I've been talking to a strong network that has hundreds of member organizations, many of which are in themselves influential organizations. And this network is afraid of advocacy. They see that it could be perceived as illegitimate lobbying, or they fear that they're walking into political issues by engaging in policy advocacy. And there are these types of fears in many places. So they don't sort of see what advocacy can be and how coalitions can work in in a constructive and inclusive and transparent manner without getting very political. And then the challenge that's top of my mind recently is the vital need for civil society and business to work together. Essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030, essential to defending democracy. And too often, business is slow to speak up when democratic principles, civil society are under threat, rule of law. And on the other side, too often civil society groups view business with suspicion and don't appreciate that business has a role in counterbalancing state power and investing in communities. Whereas together, they could do a lot and be quite influential. I've been involved in promoting the Kampala principles for private sector engagement and effective development cooperation. So sort of an attempt to guide multi-stakeholder partnerships. I think we need to learn to work together. And on the democracy side, I would point to the work of Makati Business Club, where here is business leadership working with others in defending principles like freedom of information. We need more of that around the world.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that question. And I think at this point, we can now talk about the emergence of technology, especially nowadays that social media is playing a more important role in terms of advocacy building. I think anybody could share what our experience. How do you think we should integrate technology nowadays in terms of increasing and sharing our advocacies to a greater audience? Maybe we can start with Ken.
Thank you, Diego. In terms of technology, I'm admittedly quite low tech. I like Viber groups. I like chat groups more than I probably like them too much. But it's there are low tech solutions that can bring people together even in a crisis that has kept us apart. And technology has been like that. Many of the movements that we describe in the case were born from Zoom meetings and chat groups, because we weren't allowed to go out, but still we were able to make great friendships. And we celebrate when we see each other, the first time after years of working with one another. I think those types of communication, it's great. The second is, I think social media can be used effectively for policy advocacy. The example that I'd like to give is the Citizens Budget Tracker. When we started posting, just very simply, a Google Sheet of the expenditures and the budget that government had for COVID-19. Apparently, budgets are boring, but apparently many people were quite interested, and apparently budgeting is actually exciting to some people, which is just good news for a nerd like me. We have more people, but the point is, those types of technology where you can share and work together on certain documents builds ownership also in the product. When we started, it was just a simple Google Sheet, but then we just kept on posting that we needed help. We needed help from data scientists. We needed help from graphic artists. We needed help from auditors and accountants. And every time we would put out a call, people would actually respond and be excited about the budget. Yes, Ma'am Susan. And continue to build the movement together. And at our largest, the Citizens Budget Tracker, we were 60 people. And we would use social media as well to engage government and inform about how our taxpayer money is being spent, and if it was being spent correctly, and therefore what we can do together to fight for a better budget. And those earlier engagements in digital technology gave birth to some of the larger coalitions that we now see in the People's Budget Coalition, even Move as One. Those are ways in which we're trying to bring technology to coalition building work.
Thanks, Ken. Can we have Ms. Roxanne to share her experiences and
Yeah.
insights?
Thanks, Michael. Well, technology, you can incorporate that in the planning stage, in the execution, and even in the information dissemination stage works of the coalition. By planning, I mean before we all became Zoom experts, it was very difficult to involve, organizations from different areas, from different regions, and now we even get to meet regularly with organizations even abroad. So when you plan your coalitions, you can now think beyond the geographic because technology has broken that barrier. And you can have members in your coalition originally that you wouldn't because of limited resources, right? And flying them in or you flying out. And so that's a great, I think, when you incorporate that already from the beginning. And so you become more inclusive. The second is execution. We're very excited in MBC. We're working with a few local government units running what we call digital democracy. So we try to use technology in expanding consensus building and consultation with citizens, with local citizens, city citizens, about community issues. We run we use this technology. It's a free technology, Poll That Is, for example. So it's like, it's not just a survey, but also like they can input ideas and others can also vote on each other's ideas and then build on it and expand on those ideas. So for us, it's a technology is also a democratic tool. And if LGUs can use that to add on to their physical consultations, like their town hall meetings, I think it's a powerful and effective tool to reach more people. And coalitions can also adopt that. Organizations can also adopt that. And this year we're doing that for also in expanding our FOI advocacy nationwide. So, and finally, on the last part, in your information dissemination, I agree with Ken here. Social media platforms, you have to use it wisely. There are many different platforms, but each have their own audience, set of audience or profiles. So you also have to be knowledgeable about the materials that you post. Sometimes if it's Instagram, there's such things as social tiles or maybe just 10-minute videos. But in LinkedIn, it's a different, so it's that kind of information, knowing the type of information you put out, also very critical. So technology it should not be seen just as at the end part where you post and everything. You can use it from the beginning. So it's really part of your planning or your strategy. Thanks.
Okay, Ma'am Toex.
Yeah, hello. Yeah. So for the coalitions that I've worked with, what we've really sort of maximized is the social media platform Facebook to, build build public consensus on an issue. We use these social media platforms to issue our statements, to put out quote cards, and then also check the temperament of the public, and so it's been very useful for us to build on the public consensus about a certain issue, but it's also been useful to also check how public narratives are changed by our efforts. No, sometimes you will see the tiny shifts in messages of certain big organizations or media organizations, and those things are indicative of how narratives change. For example, from car-centric messages to people-centered or centric mobility. So I think that's also good way to use technology or social media platforms to check how these changes happen. And then the third part is, it's also useful for gathering data. Sometimes, you'd find in social media, people offer different data sets or even links to certain pages. And that just, just strengthens maybe your research or your advocacy, right? Also, it's funny that social media is also a way for you to find each other. And this is a funny story, but that's how Move as One Coalition started. We found Ken on Facebook as he was talking about the citizens budget tracker, and mobility advocates were thinking, how can we get into the budget? And so when we found Ken, that's how Move Us One started. We started with a budget workshop. We found him on Facebook, and and that's how we started also expanding the network, no? And then maybe thirdly, it's funny that with all these communication platforms, right? It's also, especially during the pandemic, right? During the pandemic, face-to-face meetings didn't really, didn't happen. But we were able to negotiate budgets and access certain decision makers through these communication channels. And it's very important to see how technology can also bridge those things. We were quite surprised actually that in normal times, it's not very easy to reach out to a congressman, to a senator, and but with these technologies, the Viber, we could easily exchange data, exchange messages with decision makers, and even send our researches to them directly, very quickly, and these are used to inform their decisions when they deliberate on the budget. So we're very happy that we've been able to maximize these technologies to push forward some policy agenda. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ma'am Toys, and thank you to our panelists who have responded to the questions. So technology is very helpful. I think even when you are starting with your coalition and when you try to sustain your coalition, technology is very important and very crucial nowadays. For our last question, anyone from our panelists could answer. So this is probably an exciting topic to talk about the Philippine elections. You are left with just 12 days, I guess, or 11 days before May 9. And to anyone from our panelists who'd like to respond, what do you think are the opportunities we are seeing in the context of the upcoming elections and post-election? How do you think coalitions can move beyond simply organizing to becoming true agents for change and deepening and strengthening grassroots participation? And how do you think coalitions should innovate to adapt to the changing democracy landscape? So anyone from our panelists could begin or could answer. I see Ken smiling. Would you like to answer, Ken? Would you like to start? Oh, sige. We can begin now with Kim first. Yeah, Kim.
I saw the question in the chat about whether coalitions hedge their bets the way business might. And, sometimes the answer is easy. If those in power are in favor of what you want to do, that's a tremendous window of opportunity, and you should take advantage of it, right? But there are much more difficult situations. I'm looking at Sudan right now, where a variety of community leaders, business and civic leaders, they have hard choices. The military has sort of reversed the democratic opening, and they have to decide, what can they do and what should they do. So I think these choices are not always easy, but when it comes to timing's important, but it's like trying to time the market. It can be incredibly tricky. So I would say just a couple of lessons. One is that be mindful of what you can and are aiming to do at different stages. So for example, in the lead up to an election, this might be a great time to raise awareness of an issue. If it's a hot issue, you could get a lot of, maybe free airtime and sort of shape the thinking and just bring an issue up, right? But if your issue is not the hot political issue, or if the election's being fought over personalities and management skills and those sorts of things, there may be a lot of noise, and you may have to sort of step back and say, look, we're not going to be the dominant voice here at this time. After an election, then you're going to be looking at who's in power, and you have to get good at framing the issues. You have to understand the perspective of those who are making decisions. What are their priorities? What do they value? What do they need? And how do you connect? And how do you pitch what you're doing in ways that are relevant? Then, so sort of, raising the salience of an issue versus framing an issue, and when do you do either one? The other lesson I would share is that human beings and coalitions and political systems are incredibly complex. And sometimes the best way forward is to keep it simple. There's a political scientist who says that the best formula is really just to stay true to your values, that unite your coalition, be persistent. So instead of getting too tactical and too clever, build that momentum over time, over your values, and because that's something that draws the coalition together. And I would point to the final lesson in the guidebook about keep pounding the rock. So persistent and be ready for the window of opportunity when it does come.
Thank you, Kim. Anyone from our panelists would like to answer the question?
I think Ken raised his finger. I'm not sure what that means. So
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. I think it's important for coalitions to engage the election process. As Kim mentioned, just putting it more into the Filipino context, although we don't get to discuss this a lot because we did this before the elections. Engaging the candidates directly is a very good way to, and trying to influence what their platforms look like is another space that civil society groups can use to forward their policy advocacy. So in Move as One, for example, we organized talks where we were able to actually send briefing materials and policy briefs to each of the respective candidate pairs. We brought many of them in and actually asked them questions about transportation and mobility. What is interesting now that we saw was, I think all of the candidates have expressed support for protected bike lanes, whereas ask this question maybe 3 years ago and no one would see that it was a priority, or very, very few people would see it as a priority. So we saw that shift as well in those narratives, even like across all presidential, vice presidential candidates. The second thing that's important, and this is something that is really on the comfort levels of the institutions, is to also engage in once you've chosen, also engage in partisan politics, and really support and campaign for the president and vice president you believe will be able to forward your decision. Although, of course, this depends on your individual comfort, the comfort of the organization. And if the organization isn't a partisan organization, you can build a volunteer group for that candidate. There are many options. There are many creative ways to organize. And the third and last, it's very important to engage the leadership transition that usually happens post-election. So as soon as people know who the winner is, who the winners are. The run June 30 is a critical point for the bureaucracy, because that's when a lot of the decisions about what the direction each executive agency will take place and will take shape. And so it's important for coalitions at this point to engage both the outgoing and the incoming leadership in the departments and the government agencies that you're pushing. So this entire election process, again, another so many spaces that we can claim for pushing policy and systems change.
Yeah, just want to follow up on what Ken said. Yeah. So for some of the coalitions that I worked with, they're very aware how the elections could just disrupt some policy reform agenda. So for some of them, or they also build alliances with the bureaucracy, because it's really the bureaucracy that sustains things, no? Even if there is a change in leadership. So maybe that's something that we can also think about in coalition building, building trust with allies inside government, with a bureaucracy who could sustain like this reform that's being pushed, so that it doesn't, the momentum doesn't get disrupted by changes in leadership. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my turn now. I agree with Toix here. For us, for example, for FOI, we've developed a strong partnership with PCOO, and that serves also as our partner and our champion on the government side. So even though it's the change in administration, there's still leadership there, a partner in government that will really push for FOI and the principles that it stands for. I also like to give an example what Kim said about using, the election season to as an opportunity to raise your advocacies. So for example, MBC belongs in this Coalition in Education Nation, and sometime around 7 or 8 months before the election, they came out with a 10-point education reform agenda without really saying like who the president should be. What they did was like they list down specific recommendations for education reform, and they sought and researched and even asked the candidates about their positions in each, and mapped it out and then presented it to the public as is, right? And they're calling for they're supporting an education president. So it's very aligned with the advocacy without being too political or leaning on one candidate or other. The second one is, again, I agree with Kim, but just to put it very clearly, I think Kim, for us, we call it political mapping. Right after election, what we do is we sit down, think about our advocacies in mind, and then see who's now in charge or in the government positions, who are aside from the elected officials, who are the ministers or the secretaries assigned, and then we try to map out their previous positions and start reaching out to them, and also looking at where they stand or their previous work on that. So I agree with Kim on that. Thanks.
And Sir Ron, would you like to add about the question? You're on mute, sir.
Okay, there. Can you hear me? So I can't
Yes,
access
yeah.
the unmute. Sorry, suddenly my system is like acting up. But anyhow, I'd like to go back to the discussion, and definitely the elections is very important for us. In fact, the LGBT Chamber of Commerce first activity in 2016 was called LGBT Vote Philippines. And that's our way of just being heard. It's a very simple message. So what were the commitments of candidates back then towards LGBT plus inclusion? And we're coming full circle. 2020, this time around, we're launching again the LGBT Vote PH. In fact, this Saturday we have a webinar that will talk about the collective issues of the community and how we are raising these issues to the different presidential candidates. So I hope you'll be able to join us in that virtual session, because again, we know that we are part of a more underrepresented sector. Notwithstanding that we represent the business side of things, we still believe that the policymakers have not really mainstreamed their commitment towards an inclusive Philippine business agenda. And that's the reason why, for us, the elections is always a good opportunity to highlight or at least engage the different political leaders on how they're committing to a more inclusive Philippines. And what we've realized is that, unfortunately, I don't want to preempt myself this Saturday, but unfortunately, not all candidates are too keen on supporting diversity. Not all candidates are too keen on providing enough possible policies, government policies that will promote, protect, and enhance the living status of the marginalized sector, at least the LGBT plus community. We are beyond same-sex union. We are not just that issue. So there are more that we have to talk about. And as a business chamber, we believe that we have to hear from candidates, their promises, their commitment on how our, for example, businesses, how LGBT entrepreneurs will be supported, how LGBT workforce, professionals will be protected in their companies, and anything that's beyond these concerns. So I think we will continue the engagement, and as I said, together with our partners like CIPE and other organizations, talking to different LGBT stakeholders for the past few months, making and coming up with an LGBT vote policy paper, which we are launching on Saturday, and tapping these different candidates are all necessary steps just to continue again that conversation. I'd like to share one story. I was talking to a conglomerate back then, a big one, Philippine conglomerate, and I was asking the person in charge, like, so how are you working towards inclusion? And I was told, like, you know what, Ron, it's not our priority. We're looking still on procurement, on governance, etc. But I said, you're already you're a conglomerate. You have different companies with you. And it's unfortunate to hear that. And I guess that also reflects the status of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Philippines. And again, leadership matters. And if we cannot do it at the national level, we will do it at the local level. And I also take this opportunity to highlight one of our a study that we're launching soon, the Governance SOGI Diversity and Inclusiveness Index, as we tackle one simple question: how do we establish inclusive localities? And we say in the chamber, we have to go beyond discrimination ordinances. ADOs are there, but there are other aspects of inclusive localities that must be focused on by our local leaders. And again, we are excited to launch this in the coming weeks, and hopefully we'll get more participation, more coalition with the local government units in making sure that at their localities, businesses will thrive, notwithstanding whatever gender, but based on gender diversity. And that's what we really want to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Ron, and to our panelists, for their responses. So before we wrap up our panel discussion, anyone who'd like to give concluding remarks or a message, before we end our launch this morning? All right. I guess that's it for everyone. And Jago, would you like to proceed?
First, I think we'd like to thank our panelists for today for sharing your time and expertise with us. We learned a lot from the discussions that we have had today, and we hope that you would be able to apply also the advices that you have shared with the organizations, and also the insights that we've gained for today. Jesh?
Yes, would like to thank also our participants this morning. We are seeing also some of our board members from WeSolve Foundation, and would like to thank everyone for taking your time to listen and to be with us, no, to learn more about the values and the importance of coalitions and our crucial role in nation building. So now for our closing remarks,
Josh,
may we call, sorry, yes.
Josh, I think I saw the hand of Miss Susan earlier raised. Maybe she wanted to add something. Please, Ma'am Susan.
Susan, go ahead.
There.
Yeah, there.
Good morning, and thank you so much for this wonderful morning. I can also see my friend Mylene over there. Hello, Mylene. I am part of WeSolve as part of the board. And part of the reason why I agreed to be a part of this is precisely what we're talking about, which is supporting coalitions that matter, supporting coalitions that really push forward the whole idea of democracy. As we all know, democracy is over 1,000-year-old idea, and we keep fighting for democracy every single day of our lives. And right now, here in the Philippines, we are about to go through again an opportunity to exercise the power to vote, the power to choose our leaders, the power to choose the direction of our future. But there were a few comments that were made earlier, like let's say when you say vote wisely, or when you say respect my vote. Unfortunately, one of the things that we lack in our country right now as well is critical thinking. And so when you say vote wisely, some people, I feel, do not know how to even start or to think of how to vote wisely. And when you talk about respect as well, respect goes both ways. And so we have a long way to go. But I think opportunities like this to dialogue, to talk, to support one another is very, very important. So one of the things probably Ken and the WeSolve group can do would be not only should you send out the guidebook, but maybe have an insert of vetted coalitions, okay, names of vetted coalitions that might want to mentor startup coalitions all over the country, and maybe we can expand this all over Asia. I work for the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation, and we're big as well in terms of promoting coalitions, but not just in our country, but around Asia, because we're all doing the same thing. We just have a different methodology in different ways of doing this. And when we talk about pakikisama or very Filipino, I would say things that we do, sometimes we might think it's Filipino, but there's another word for it in Bahasa, and there's another word for it in another language or another dialect. So again, mabuhay to the WeSolve Foundation. Thank you for what you're trying to do, because I think it's excellent. To the speakers that took their time out from their very, very busy schedules, everything that you said, I felt was so authentic, so important. And I just thank you all so much for being a part of this. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Ms. Susan. Thank you, really thank you from us for taking your time also to share your thoughts. And we are taking note of the suggestion. You will definitely include that in the guidebook. All right. So for our closing remarks, we may now have Ms. Rojana Herter.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just want to first start off by saying thank you to Miss Susan Afon for those just very important comments and insights, and we're so grateful to have you here with us today. Thank you, Jesha and Diego, for being our wonderful moderators today. A huge thank you to our fellow panelists who joined us, Ms. Toix, Roxanne, Ron, and Ken and Kim. We greatly appreciate your time and insights today. And thank you to the whole WeSolve team, Jesha, Haya, Diego, and to all of our attendees for joining in and listening in today as well. It's our pleasure. It's been our pleasure to be able to introduce the guidebook to you all today. Once it is published officially, we hope that many of you will take advantage of it, and we'll take a look at it. Let us know what you think, how you hope to use it in your own efforts. Let us know what we can do to make it more useful to you. We hope to continue to build upon it as well. Just a few final thoughts in closing. Over the years, CIPE has really, we've worked with a lot of partners around the world to help them build and strengthen their advocacy coalitions. And we know that coalitions have such a vital role in helping civil society and the private sector to engage in collective action. And as Kim noted, to advance pluralistic solutions. They play such an important role in both public oversight and advocating for policy reforms, increasing citizen participation, and strengthening democratic institutions. I just want to point out something that Ryan noted in his opening remarks as well, which is that really in the Philippines, coalition building is an organic concept entrenched in the democratic values of the Filipino people. And so our hope and intention for creating this guidebook was to not only capture lessons and good practices from the deep history and experience here in the Philippines, and from our experienced and amazing partners who themselves have such an excellent track record of mobilizing and sustaining strong coalitions of diverse civil society and private sector organizations in their respective fights for freedom of information, the SOGI equality, diversity, equity, inclusion, transparency, and accountability, and more. But we also wanted to develop this toolkit to be able to strengthen the capacity of and incubate advocacy coalitions so that they can tackle the challenges facing the country today and in the future. We wanted to help our partners to build these strong, cohesive, credible coalitions that can have a clear and comprehensive advocacy agenda to support innovative and impactful governance solutions and reforms. All in all, we're so proud of this guidebook. We hope it'll be an excellent resource for both new organizers and experienced conveners alike, as well as interested organizations, champions, and advocates seeking to engage in advocacy and reform. Please stay tuned for the official release coming soon. And on that note, I would like to close out the event and thank you to everyone who came. It has been really a privilege to be here and to listen to the engaging, rich dialogue of our panelists. So thank you, everyone, and please we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Picture po tayo.